Yes, hello everyone. I'm just going to present here the screen. Right, hope you reach me loud and clear. I'm Damiano Cerrone, and we've been working on this study also together with other people from Spin Unit, together with John Hathaway, Christian as well, who will present after me on this study for quite a long time now, and it is quite nice to see it coming all together. But I would say that this was a very transformative study, at least for me personally, because when we jumped into this project almost a year ago, we basically knew from the literature that quite often shrinkage is something that relates to basically to industrial cities, and it has a kind of regional patterns and national patterns that pretty much relates to the industrial to the kind of decline of the industrial production of some regions. But I think it was quite transformative for us because we started to see that it was way more complex than that. So it wasn't just the industry, it wasn't just some building types, it wasn't just some regions. The patterns were rather more complex and interesting than we thought. So the key question we had, which of course I can barely scratch the surface today with this presentation, but the key question we had was to understand what were the shrinking patterns in Estonia, what are the most vulnerable areas and building types, and then also understanding how this data should be collected. So if at the national level we want to keep tracking this phenomenon, or at the municipal level we want to understand what are the KPIs, then what kind of data we need to collect, how, and how to keep track of it. So these were kind of the key three questions for us. As I said, I can just kind of only scratch the surface today, but I think that you will get a general idea of where we are and where we're leading to. So to understand the patterns across scale, I will mainly show you insights from two different data sets. One is the electricity consumption of buildings in Estonia, and the other one is the population registry. These are telling us two different stories, because the electricity consumption is pretty much related to how the houses are used. However, a building, a sort of a dwelling, so a flat, is considered vacant when it consumes less than 100 kilowatts a year. So it's basically, even if you would have a fridge on and switch on the light sometimes during a year, it wouldn't look like it's vacant. So basically, if it's vacant to the electricity consumption data, it means the flat for a whole year has been basically collecting dust. Population registry tells a different story, because population registry is telling us where people register themselves. So it's where they declare that they live. And it's telling us a different story, because we know that there are new phenomena such as multilocality that are a bit giving us a different picture on the map, but we'll get to that soon, and Christy is going to talk about that later as well. But long story short, we have these two core data sets, we join them together, and then we mapped up at the building scale, at the H3, which are these kind of grid cells, then settlement units, municipality, and regions, and we start to explore from that. So everything started, of course, as usual, with population change. That's wherever you start a study on shrinking cities, you first try to understand where the population is heading to. And overall, Estonia in the past kind of 7-10 years has been rather stable. So it has been neither growing or shrinking in terms of population numbers. However, if you start to look at the population change relative to the national trend, then the picture starts to become more interesting. Because what we see is that, yes, overall population is rather flat, but within Estonia, clearly the commuter belts of Tallinn and Tartu are growing in terms of population. So they're becoming more desirable. It was a bit of a surprise originally, because we thought that we expected to see a pattern in which rural areas are losing population, which you can clearly see it is that way. However, we thought that the cities were even more attractive. But quite clearly, it's the commuter belt area, which is mostly characterized by single-family houses most of the time, that is actually growing rather fast. So one of the key questions then is, what are the vacancy rate? Because most of the studies usually are based basically on population data, but I think what makes this study internationally relevant is that it is really uncommon to have such a data sets as they're available in Estonia. So this kind of registry digitalized are extremely hard to find, and quite often they're not even accurate. So actually, this is a kind of, I would say, it's a breakthrough type of study that we managed to do because of the data that was basically available. That often it's not there. So we could basically go beyond the population. So we could try to understand shrinkage not as population loss, but as the loss of certain building types, and also certain areas. So understanding where is vacant. So about 25% municipalities have a vacancy rate of at least 15%, which is actually quite high if you look at the electricity index, because as I said, it means that for a full year, a flat has been collecting dust. So having it as an average kind of in a municipality is a rather high number. Indeed, if you think Estonia, basically the two main urban regions, so if you look at Tallinn municipality and Tartu municipality, the vacancy rate is 4%, so it's rather low, even though we know that in cities there is quite a lot of real estate transaction and people move a lot, so it makes some numbers of some municipalities even more alarming. However, you will see soon that it's not that alarming, because when you zoom in, the story starts to be developed. So first of all, you start to see that there is this clear diagonal, let's say, section of Estonia that divides north and south. You can see it in the bottom left corner with this kind of purple color, which is where sort of the core of the vacancy, it's basically kind of visible. And it's clearly splitting north and south, but actually when you see it from a geographical perspective, it's not really north and south. It's rather that this is the area which is rather distant from Tallinn and Tartu. So it's kind of the in-between area. So there is something to look into that more in the future, but basically this is suggesting that the distance from the kind of well-served cities, it's definitely a factor for the vacancy rate to be so high. But as I said, there's a lot of forest in Estonia as well. So when you start to map these on the actual geographical unit, so in this case it's the it's the settlement units, you see a much more interesting complex picture. So you start to see that the cities like Tallinn in the north and Tartu and Pärnu, they're rather stable in terms of vacancy rate. But even within those so-called growing regions, you see still that there are actually, the shrinkage is splintered phenomenon. So this vacancy is actually occurring in almost every region. It's just with different gravity and with different rates. But basically, every region has some clusters of shrinkage within it, which was also, again, a bit of a surprise because from the researcher, you usually don't see these kind of things because they, like, usually researchers, they only have population registry. So the vacancy rates, of course, are rather high in settlements that are further from metropolitan regions. However, you also need to consider that quite often, not quite often, but in quite a few cases, you might have settlement units with a high vacancy rate because they are summer houses. They're places where, with a lot of summer houses that have been transformed. So there is also the thing to consider. But our team went to basically also explore those places. So we basically had a chance to study this in depth. So here, basically, when we start to zoom in some regions, for example, here we're in the east of Estonia, we can see even better that shrinkage is a really localized phenomenon. So you have some settlements which are extremely vacant and some settlements which are not, and they're even in close proximity to each other. So we cannot really say that, let's say, a region is shrinking as a whole, because within it, there is some growth and there is some shrinkage. So it's much more complex and much more interesting. And at this level, you start to see where the problematic areas are, because if you have a settlement unit that is 20 or 25% vacant, it means that 1 in every 4th building in a whole neighborhood is basically empty. So it's rather kind of something to look more deep into. But further inquiry is necessary to kind of really understand the patterns, because we are still, let's say, that we are still pretty much biased by the size and the shape of those settlement units. So we aggregate, so we tessellate the information. So we aggregate it according to a grid cell made of this hexagon called the H3. And here is the way we can finally start to understand better the patterns, because in the cells, I mean, each cell is the same size and same shape, more or less. So we can really understand where the clusters are. And again, this is not so much to just put them on the map, but it's for us to go there and study them in more more carefully in understanding what is the kind of a situation on the ground. And those kind of clusters quite often are surprising because when we go there and fly the drones, we actually end up quite often with extremely beautiful landscape and where the green areas are basically kind of literally wrapping around these developments. And there is really high qualities in the design as well, because these are historic buildings from the Stalinistic period as well as even earlier, even pre-war. However, it was quite surprising indeed that those most beautiful buildings that you would think there would be, let's say, the ones that are least vacant, they're the ones quite often are the most vacant for many reasons that Christy also will talk about later. But at least with these cartographies, we can start to identify the actual area, not so much of where population is declining, but rather where buildings are becoming vacant. So this allows us to start a completely new different type of research, which is basically leaving the desk and starting to drive the car across Estonia and start to understand what is happening, because it gets even more interesting when we overlay on top of these kind of clusters of shrinkage, we also overlay the actual change in vacancy rate. So we can use the electricity data to understand where empty buildings are sort of clustering. But on top of that, with the arrows here you see on the left, we can see what's been the trajectory. So is this has been shrinking in the past 10 years? So have the vacancy rate been increasing or decreasing? And actually quite often it's very interesting, because if you would have just seen this from the first map, you would think that, okay, it's a cluster of vacancy, it's kind of cluster of shrinkage, and that's that. However, 3 out of those 5 places are actually gaining new, let's say, new people. So the vacancy rate has been decreasing, even though it's quite high, but it's been decreasing. So that's also what it was said in the introduction, is that this phenomenon is rather complex. And exactly, sometimes even a shrinking place can actually start to grow back again. So how does vacancy rate then are changing? Well, across the board, actually Estonia is, the vacancy rate are declining. So all these blue arrows up, it means that most of the municipality are basically seeing a moment where the vacancy is decreasing. However, there are still about 4 or 5 municipalities that are becoming more vacant. So they have high vacancy rate and they're also vacant, and they're becoming more vacant. So this is quite interesting for us, because we again see that the commuter belt of Tallinn and Tartu is where this growth is sort of focusing. So it's where the occupancy rates are basically increasing. And in some areas in the East Estonia, we see that the vacancy are maybe not so high, but it's becoming more vacant across time. And again, the complexity increases again when we zoom in. So if, for example, we see now one area here of Jõhvi, which actually is one of those cities in which the population and the rates overall as a municipality, they're actually not in a bad place at all. However, within that area, it's quite interesting to see the trajectories. So we can see areas, especially this sort of outside of the border, so single family houses or former summer houses that actually have high vacancy rate but are starting to grow again. So there's a transformation process going on. As well as we see on the bottom left area like Sompa, where we basically have the opposite. So it's high vacancy and it's kept on shrinking for like 7 years straight. So this really is suggesting us that we cannot have a kind of a one measure for all. So we cannot have one approach for all. We cannot have one, let's say, one suggestion for all. Because even within a same kind of, even within a small area like a city and its suburbs, we see that there are patterns of shrinkage and patterns of growth, and they're quite often extremely complex. So we really need to go there and understand better how this works. However, the shrinkage patterns are also very difficult to really understand just with the maps, because the reason why an area is shrinking, it's always different based on where you are. Sometimes it is just an industry going down, but sometimes it's just a building type which is difficult to renovate. Or sometimes it is a socioeconomic condition where there is no financing to renovate the building. So let's say the causes of shrinkage not only can change from region to region, but they can even change from city to city and from city to suburb. So that's what makes it extremely more interesting than we originally thought. So it's not just, east, west, north, south, and they're kind of rate changing, but it's really at the neighborhood level where things are getting really complex and interesting. So then what are the most vulnerable places? Because eventually we need to summarize. So I'm skipping here hundreds of maps that we have produced to really understand this better, because it's very hard to condensate this in a short presentation. However, what we can try to do is we can try to understand which are the areas that are most vulnerable, and then also we can start to understand which are the areas that needs our attention, let's say, faster than other. So the vulnerability index is something that we are developing together also with our team, and of course also with together with the representative from the ministry and the steering group. But we basically put together 5 indicators. So we put together the relative population loss. So basically it's the relative shrinkage of the population in the area, in the municipality. We look at the DEMPLI, which is basically it's how fast is aging the population in the municipality. So it's the ratio between young people and old people. Then we look at the vacancy ratio today, according to electricity data. And then we look at the trajectory. So is this vacancy rate increasing or decreasing across time? And then the last one is the debt share of the municipality. So to understand basically even the kind of, let's say, financial capacity to sort of deal with the shrinkage. So when we put these 5 indicators together, we redraw a map of Estonia, which help us understanding again that this diagonal part, which is this sort of the municipalities that are in between Tallinn and Tartu, they're most vulnerable, but sometimes for different reasons. That was interesting. Again, even here, there's a lot of complexity. Sometimes a municipality actually has a young population, but perhaps the vacancy rates are getting higher fast. While in some other places, it could be that there is very low vacancy. However, we have kind of high debt. So again, in each municipality, you have a different story, but the overall pattern is that the distance, let's say, from the 2 economic centers or the 2 sort of urban centers of Estonia seems to play, again, quite important role in this case. And on the bottom left, you can see the same map, but kind of put on the actual cartography of Estonia. So you understand, you can see really well this diagonal line, and you can see in blue in the north, there is the Tallinn metropolitan region, and then in the south, southeast, you see Tartu, and then southwest, you see, kind of west actually, you see Pärnu. So basically, across from the Tallinn, Tartu, and Pärnu metropolitan regions, the vulnerabilities actually start to increase as you move out of those urban centers. But again, it's quite open to interpretation. It's quite open to further analysis, because none of these indexes are weighted. So it means that we give the same importance to the debt as much as the same importance to the population loss. But we can keep developing this index for the future so that it better represents, let's say, the interest of the municipalities and the KPIs they want to track, basically. When we think about priorities, though, because this is telling us what municipality might be more vulnerable than another, however, where should we start to look into a bit kind of closer? So how do we take the next steps after the study is finished? We are basically looking at the relationship between, for each municipality, we look at the relationship between the vacancy rate, so how empty, how vacant, how many empty dwellings basically there are in the municipality, and then if it's been increasing or not. So if that rate has been increasing or not in the past 7 years. So in a way, of course, the most urgent places to look at are the one in red, where you have high vacancy rate, and this vacancy rate is been constantly kind of going up in the past 7 years. And maybe not so urgent, but still something to look into, especially in terms of research, are those municipalities that they have low vacancy rates, but the vacancy rate has been increasing quite fast more recently. So these are the ones that we want to look at for future projections. So we want to understand where this municipality possibly leading to in the next 10 years. Then with the pink one, which is the majority, these are municipalities that have high vacancy rate. However, they're not shrinking as fast, actually. Some of them, they are gaining population. So the vacancy is quite high, but the occupancy is growing a bit. So it means that maybe it's not so urgent to really start from those. However, they still need our attention because, of course, like the vacancy rate are quite often in these places beyond 20%. So it's still kind of every fifth building potentially is empty, or every fifth dwelling is potentially empty. And then the last bunch, which is again is the urban regions and the islands. So a low vacancy rate, and the occupancy is increasing actually quite fast. So these are the one that give us an understanding of basically what are the most desirable places in Estonia today. To start to conclude, basically, and Christian will tell you much more about the data, which is super, super interesting, how it was collected and processed. But basically, let me just move this banner from here. Basically, what is interesting is that there is not really like a general pattern unless this clear distance from the region, from the kind of urban centers. However, what's been interesting is that also growing cities can experience micro shrinkage. So we came into this study knowing from literature that it's about population loss, it's about the industry, and usually kind of the urban center don't really like experience shrinkage. However, we started to see that it's not really so. So even area in which the occupancy rate overall is increasing and areas where the population is also increasing, they still can have patterns of shrinkage, especially in their peripheries, outside of the urban cores. And again, it's very complex situation. Quite often it's because certain building types are hard to renovate or too expensive to renovate. And some other times it's simply because there's a transformation going on between summer houses becoming single family houses. So what we see also with this cartography is pretty much Estonia becoming multi-local as well. So there is pretty much of that. And of course, we can also track how many clusters there are and if the number of clusters is increasing, which in some places it is. For example, in the Tartu region, the number of clusters are increasing. But in other places like in Valga or even in Viljandi, even though the vacancy rate are high, the number of clusters is decreasing. So there are very interesting phenomena that have to be looked at a very local level, and Christy will tell more about that later. But I think, at least for me, the thing I wanted to maybe conclude with is that actually shrinking cities are also growing. So there is this idea that shrinking city is only shrinking, but within its region, within its area, there is still growth because some areas are becoming more desirable, because living patterns are changing, and because we talked again before about multilocality, especially during COVID, the habits of people have changed quite much. And that's why it's very interesting to look at electricity data, because as I said, even if you would use a flat for let's say 3 months, it's going to look like it's actually occupied. So it's only really if flats are not used for a full year that we see it as a vacant. So I think the reason why we see this sort of growth of villages and small towns, it has pretty much to do with multilocality, because we can capture this phenomenon with electricity data. So if you look at small towns, actually more than 100 are growing against 40 shrinking. And also with villages, more than 2,000 villages are actually, gaining occupancy, and only 300 are shrinking. You might wonder, okay, but this doesn't add up. Well, it doesn't because certain villages, let's say, might have maybe like 10 buildings in it. So what is happening is that the villages that are shrinking, they usually have many more buildings in it than the villages that are growing. So as absolute number, more villages are growing than shrinking, but within that village there is more, let's say, there's a different building stock. And we have this analysis that's just too much to show today, but basically it is possible for us to really understand what type of building stock and by which amount is becoming more or less vacant in each settlement unit. It's just too much stuff to show now here, but to give an idea, it is possible. So we clearly saw then eventually that there is quite a lot of positive deviance positive deviants are, let's say, buildings that are doing well in an area that is shrinking. You can see them here, for example, on this map on the right-hand side. This is one street in Rakvere, which was highly vacant. So almost every other building was basically nearly empty. However, there was a very interesting, let's say, work done with the street. The street was renovated. Some buildings started to become renovated. And then you see this kind of black swans sort of emerging. So you start to see those buildings that perhaps before interventions were not worth maybe renovating, but because there was, let's say, a public space renewal that is dragging basically, like it's bringing kind of positive change to the old street. So this was a very interesting example to look at, and there's plenty more. But with the last one is one of my favorite, that there was one area in which the buildings were basically almost all the same, and they all had extremely high vacancy rate. So it was maybe like 10 dwellings out of 12 were empty. However, there was this one beautiful white building, which was just the opposite. It was actually freshly renovated and kind of full of new people that inhabited. And it was kind of really beautiful to understand that actually there is also strong values in those buildings. So this study is not about finding, let's say, those places that are clustering and kind of what's going down and looking for this, let's say, the most vacant building in Estonia. Actually, we are mostly interested to find the least vacant building in Estonia in a shrinking cities, because this is telling us where should we move towards the future. This is kind of leading the path. So this one white building here is giving us an idea to us and to policymakers towards what could be the actions in the future. So this has been kind of actually the focus of plenty of also flights that Christian has been doing with the drone to really understand what these positive deviants are doing. So why those buildings are doing better than others. So to conclude, basically, this study, it really is about having the very first kind of insights to start the debate and establish cooperations, because so far this type of research was simply not possible to do. The data was simply not existing. And with population data only, you just cannot get to this level of understanding of what actually works and what doesn't work. It's also a benchmark for future and continuous research. So now we can start to build on top of this. So now let's say the milestones are set, and we can start to move forward new research, especially on the ground, because we are now enabled in terms of selecting geographical area that we can survey, because Estonia is still huge, still a big country to kind of survey on site. But with these cartographies, now we can start doing that a bit more, let's say, more efficiently. And then lastly, I think this allows innovation in the policymaking process, because we can gain both the sort of information from the data and the information from the ground. So Christy and Lauri, they've been doing a lot of interviews together with the steering group. So we know so much better also why things are happening. So this is not just a map. I would like to really stress this, that data has its own issues, as usual, and Christian will tell you more in 1 minute. However, when we really understood so much kind of the path towards the future is with interviews and studies on site. So this is where we want to lead to. So we want to lead towards generative cities, and we want to do it together with very interesting research coming up in the future, hopefully. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Damiano, for this very interesting presentation. And we have also some questions. I think maybe the first one, it's really popular, but I think also Krista maybe will help to answer this question, but I'm gonna ask you, and you can explain from your city planner perspective. So the question is, just wondering whether you can also distinguish temporarily occupied second housing from totally deserted settlements.
I think the answer is yes. So the only thing is that we have, in this subset that I presented today, in those maps, we have removed them. So we have removed the summer houses because, of course, they're mostly 100% vacant and they're not used as residencies. But yes, it is possible, but you have not, they were not included in this map. So every area which had more than 75% of summer houses was excluded from these maps. So if you would include them, the things I've shown you would have a bump up in let's say, in vacancy of quite a few percentage points, actually.
Thank you. And another question that arrived. So the data shows that overall Estonian population size is diminishing, but few areas are growing. So where does this additional inhabitants slowing down of shrinkage come from? So how do the numbers sum up all together?
Oh yeah, maybe I didn't explain it. Maybe I was too fast, maybe when I went through that map. But basically, so that the population in Estonia is not changing. I mean, it's been changing, but so slightly. But that map I show you with the arrows is relative to the national trends. So it means, given that the population is not changing, where people are, which kind of areas they are living and to which they are relocating. So of course we cannot really know, but what we can what that map suggests is that people are basically moving from, it's the same number of people. They're just moving from one place to another, basically. So it's not growth in the sense that new people are coming in. It's the same that maybe we're in the countryside and moved to the commuter belts of Tallinn.
Thank you for that answer. And since we have some more time, I'm going to ask also some more questions. So there's also one question that if there are any recommendations to spatial planning on how to achieve the attractiveness of shrinking settlements for the population.
Well, what was very interesting actually is that quite often the quality of the natural environment was very high. So actually they were like shrinking cities are really beautiful, like next to the forest or next to a lake, next to a river. So the the natural environment is great. What they were lacking though, it was a lot of the, say, public spaces and infrastructure, bus stops. So all these all those little things that people interact with in the everyday life. So infrastructure, the public space. And then one thing that we would like to do further, maybe in the future, is to basically analyze also the amount of services. Because one thing that we saw also is that perhaps is the distance to the service areas that is also mattering a lot. So if the building is, let's say, it's 10 minutes drive from the closest, shops or something, that can also be influencing it quite a lot. So we have some rough analysis, which I've not presented, but it seems that this is something that exactly we cannot really change. We cannot change the proximity to services. We can, of course, bring more services into these areas. But definitely, like, starting from public space and infrastructure is definitely like, it seems from the cases also in Rakvere and other places that it really pays back.
Thank you, Damiano. And there's one last open question. I think this is something which can be taken into consider later on after we are already achieving next goals regarding this data asset that we have. But maybe you can give your own reflection. Can your data also take into account people's preference to live in newly built housing rather than Soviet era housing? Would you consider this as something to add on or have a value maybe?
Yeah, the sound was a bit disturbed, so I'm not sure if I understood right. But basically, well, yeah, first of all, it's not sort of my data; it's actually your data in all senses. Yes, I think Christy will show a bit about that actually. So she will go into the building themselves, and even Lauri has been working so much with the renovation study that's been running, and so I think that you will hear a lot about this later in the future. But my feeling about this data set is that we're only scratching the surface now. So Christian will show you like in a minute, but basically the project was like 8 months long, and 7 was only to collect this data. So basically, more than 90% of our time went to just to get it, make sense of it, and package it together. So I think that we basically learned 5% of what we could possibly learn in the next 6 months. So I think, yeah, it's going to be, the learning points are going to be exponentially kind of increasing the more we look into it. But building data, Christy will tell something more.
So thank you very much, Damiano, for this presentation, and again for the answers and your reflections. And now it's time to give floor to Kristen Männigo, who is data scientist in the spin unit, and he will discuss more deeply about the possibilities and risks regarding data analysis.